By far the most important part of the sit-down with Donald Trump was the thing about NATO. I've been telling you, everyone's been using it. America's going to leave. We've got to have a European defence union, and one possibly with military weapons. So I asked him, what happens if Poland is invaded? And just to remind ourselves, this is what he said.
Yeah, but the United States should pay its fair share, not everybody else's fair share.
No, fair enough.
I believe the United States was paying 90% of NATO, the cost of NATO. It could be 100%.
Yep.
It was the most unfair thing. And don't forget, it's more important to them than it is to us. We have an ocean in between some problems, okay? We have a nice, big, beautiful ocean. And it's more important for them. They were taking advantage, and they did. They took advantage of us on trade, and they took advantage on
So if they play fair, if they start to play fair, America's there.
Yes, 100%.
100%. It was on the front page of the Times. It's been right across the press. It's been talked about, not just here, but in Europe too. It is fundamentally important. And yet, you'd have thought, wouldn't you, with a large Polish community living here, that would be of interest to that community. Many of them, of course, paying the BBC licence fee. The BBC, and we've been through their website from top to bottom, have not mentioned the fact that Trump said that, which I think is absolutely appalling. But perhaps not surprising. Now, Coughlin, Defence and Foreign Affairs Editor at The Telegraph. This was quite an important statement, wasn't it?
It's a very important statement and very reassuring because, as you say, Nigel, there's been a lot of speculation about the Americans and where they are. The Americans have been complaining about other nations, particularly in Europe, not paying their fair share, going back to the Bush administration. And before coming on, I was just looking up the figures. 10 years ago, only 3 member states of NATO paid their fair share, right? That was 10 years ago. Now it's up to about 18 or 19. That still leaves in excess of 10 countries who are not meeting their 2% of GDP minimum requirement. So there's still work to be done. And I think what Trump has said has really encouraged the Europeans to raise their game. And of course, you know, you've just had Putin re-elected at the weekend. The first thing he said after in his election press conference, post-election press conference, he's talking about World War III. So, I mean, if people don't realise what the threat is in Europe today, then they must be bonkers.
Yeah, and the fact that he talks about potentially using nuclear weapons, I mean, all of this...
Well, this is all bluff.
Yeah, but it's pretty appalling, isn't it?
Yeah.
How vulnerable would a country like Moldova be?
Oh, very. I mean, it'd be a walkover. I mean, just look at... The size of the Russian military. I mean, they've taken 400,000 casualties in 2 years in Ukraine. They're still there. They're still pressing forward. They don't care about the casualty rates, unlike the rest of us. So, you know, a small little enclave like Moldova would be very, very vulnerable. But it's not just Moldova. I mean, you've got, you know, the whole Baltic area is under threat. You've mentioned Poland. I mean, if the key thing, if Putin wins in Ukraine, then NATO is next. And I think Putin's made that clear. And so when you look at the Europeans, you know, including us, I mean, we're still just nudging above the 2% minimum requirement. We should be looking at 3% of GDP.
Well, Grant Shapps said this the other day, the Defence Secretary, didn't he?
He did. And there's a good report out today with people like Mark Sedwell, the former National Security Advisor, George Robertson, you know, one of a really successful NATO Secretary General. These people are saying we are not equipped. The army's run down. It's too small. You know, we need to rearm to deal with the threat from Putin.
And a Labour government that comes in with a big majority, where does it put defence in terms of its priorities?
Well, they're making the right noises. And actually, when you look at Labour governments, they sometimes sort of overcompensate because people expect a Labour government really not to take defence seriously, but they overcompensate. We saw that with Blair. But of course, putting the money where their mouth is the real key. They haven't done that in the past. In fact, a lot of the black hole problems that Jacob would know about, that the Tories inherited when they came in 2010, was because Gordon Brown, first as Chancellor and then as Prime Minister, didn't provide adequate funding. So, you know, they've got to raise their game too.
Yeah. And with what Trump has said, and it couldn't have been clearer, 100%, do we now stop this debate about a European defence union, or will they keep on pushing in Brussels?
They will keep on pushing in Brussels.
They will.
And you've seen this with you mentioned earlier in your programme, the Houthi problem of the Red Sea. And the EU's put together a naval task force to rival what the Americans and British are doing. But they've been given a mandate not to take any action. I mean, it's a non-aggressive.
And I bet the French aren't involved.
They're not. They're keeping their distance.
Funny that. Coughlin, thank you
Pleasure.
for coming in and joining us.